military officer at the Pentagon podium, and the press knew that I had no political leanings whatsoever. I wasn't a political appointee. And then even at state, I was still a retired admiral, and so I didn't get much personal criticism of President Obama. There was one time it did happen, but other than that, it was about the policies. And the decisions we were making in places like Syria and Libya and Iraq and Iran, Paris Climate Accords, those were the things that I had to be prepared really to defend. And what was nice was that the communications people across the interagency and all across the government were included in the policy-making process. Not just how are you going to communicate the policy, but actually make the policy. We were all welcome in the room. And so when you're part of the policy-making process, when you have a stake and you've had a vote in what the decision the government's going to make about a particular foreign policy issue, it's much easier to stand up there and defend it because you were part of it and you understand the nuances of it. You don't have to be incessantly briefed every day on every possible question. It's sort of just integral to your own thinking. I think any spokesman, you have to compartmentalize. And Gordon said it right at the top in his last answer. You can't take any of this personally, not just the criticism of your boss or the policy, but anything. Being a spokesman means certainly when you walk up to that podium, nobody cares what you think, and nobody should care what you think. Your job is to articulate the policy. Your job is to explain what we're doing with taxpayer dollars, with sons and daughters who are wearing the uniform, and that should be your focus. And you should never nothing that you believe about a sitting senator or a congressman or about the policy itself should bear fruit. I mean, there were several issues that obviously as a spokesman were more difficult for me to talk about because it's not like I didn't have personal feelings or emotions about it, but that once you walk up there, all that stuff has to wash away. There were lots of times where I had a different view of how we ought to communicate a certain thing, or even a different view about the policy decision itself. But again, I had a seat at the table and I had a voice, and I was expected to use that voice. I didn't win every argument, far from it, but it's important if you're going to be a spokesman, particularly in the government, that you make sure you have that seat at the table, that you have an opportunity to shape the way your boss is thinking about a problem, much less communicating about the problem. You make your case, you have that debate, and then if you lose, if they go a different way, then unless, as Gordon says, it's something that you simply can't personally stomach and you have to walk away. If you're not at that level, then you got to go out and do the best you can to articulate that. Back to your question about separating personal from professional. Right. It's always professional. And you just have to, if you lose the argument, you move on. And you do the best you can to articulate that. Certainly these days, policy making in any administration is potentially divisive just because of who's making the decision. I always viewed it as my job was to explain and to allow, whether I was at state or the Pentagon, to allow the policies that President Obama was putting into place, to allow them to face scrutiny, to be held to account through the media to the American people, or at the State Department to people around the world. And you have to recognize that when you're doing that, whatever you say, there's going to be some people that obviously see it differently, and it's going to be contentious. I never looked at my job as deliberately not making something divisive. I looked at it as explaining to the best I could. Now, because I was in uniform at the Pentagon and retired uniform at state, I was very careful not to get political or partisan at the podium. In fact, when I interviewed with Secretary Kerry, I didn't know him, and he said, "What do you need from me?" And I said, "I need you to keep me out of the politics because I don't have a uniform anymore, but I'm not a political guy." And he was great about that and promised me that he would never ask me to get in that way, and I never did. So I wasn't up at the podium criticizing Senator so-and-so because Senator so-and-so was criticizing our policy on Syria. I simply re-articulated what we were doing and why, and respectfully understood where the senator was, but this is why we're doing it that way. So I looked at it from just trying to be a good explainer.